All right, everybody, welcome back. Today we're going to be taking a deep dive into a topic that I think is endlessly fascinating.
Oh, yeah.
Psychopaths. And, you know, I think we all kind of have this like morbid curiosity about what makes someone a
Mhm.
psychopath, what's going on in their brains,
Yeah.
and luckily for us, a listener sent in this YouTube video. It's an interview with a neuroscientist, Jim Fallon, and he's done some really interesting research on this.
I'm familiar with Fallon's work. He's done some groundbreaking stuff.
Yeah, so this is going to be good.
Yeah.
I think for me, when I think about psychopaths, one of the first people that comes to mind is Ted Bundy.
Oh, yeah. Classic example.
Right? Like so charming,
Mhm.
so successful, and yet underneath it, all this brutal serial killer. And
Yeah.
it's like, how can those two things coexist in the same person?
Well, and that's exactly what makes figures like Bundy so fascinating to neuroscientists, right?
Yeah.
They're trying to understand what creates that disconnect between outward appearance and their actions.
Yeah, like is there something physically different about their brains?
Well, that's what they're trying to figure out,
Yeah.
and the research is actually pretty compelling.
Really?
Yeah. Brain scans of psychopaths consistently show some distinctive patterns, particularly in an area called the orbital cortex.
The orbital cortex.
Yeah, you can think of it as like the brain center for empathy and moral reasoning.
Okay.
And in psychopaths, this region often shows significantly reduced activity.
Whoa. So you're saying like if you looked at a brain scan, you could potentially tell.
Potentially, yeah. I mean, it's
Oh, right.
not a foolproof method,
Yeah.
but the idea that you might be able to identify someone's capacity for violence based on their brain structure is
Yeah.
pretty wild.
That's heavy.
It is.
Okay, well, so let's talk about Jim Fallon then. The video kind of lays out this incredible story about his self-discovery, right? He's this neuroscientist who's been studying psychopaths for years, looking at brain scans. And then he has this, like, what almost seems like a made-up moment where he stumbles on his own brain scan
It's crazy, right?
mixed in with data from his family.
Yeah, like something out of a movie.
So wait, he accidentally discovers that he has the brain of a psychopath.
That's exactly what happens.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, his scan shows that classic pattern of reduced activity in the empathy region we were just talking about.
Okay, but hold on, he's not a serial killer. He's
Exactly.
got a career, he's got a family.
Right, he's a functioning member of society.
So what's going on there?
Well, that's what makes Fallon's story so intriguing. He uses it to argue that while genetics might load the gun, as he puts it,
Okay,
it's the environment that pulls the trigger.
I see.
Meaning, you could have a predisposition towards psychopathy, but whether or not you actually become violent depends on your life experiences.
Okay, so maybe Fallon had a really stable childhood, like loving family, and that somehow prevented him from going down a darker path.
That's exactly what he suggests.
Wow.
He believes his positive upbringing played a crucial role.
Okay, but then that raises the question, like, what if his childhood had been different?
Mhm.
What if there had been trauma or abuse or something? Like, would he have turned out like Ted Bundy?
That's a huge question, right? It's like,
Yeah.
is it really that clear-cut? Nature versus nurture?
Right.
And then to make things even more complicated, Fallon brings up this whole other element, this idea of a missing piece.
Oh, yeah, the video mentions that, like, something beyond brain structure and environment,
Yeah.
that might determine whether someone with psychopathic tendencies actually acts on them.
Exactly.
But what could that even be?
Well, that's what we're going to try to figure out.
Right.
The video offers some clues, and I think you'll find them pretty fascinating.
Okay, I'm hooked. Let's get into it.
Let's do it.
Okay, so we're talking about this missing piece, right? Like, it's the one thing we can't seem to figure out about psychopaths.
It really is a puzzle, isn't it? Like, we've
Yeah.
got some pieces figured out,
Yeah.
brain structure, environment, but there's something else there.
Yeah, like, what are we missing?
And, it's funny you mentioned Ted Bundy earlier, because I think he might hold a clue.
Oh, really?
How so? Well, think about his charm, how he used it to manipulate people.
Ugh, it's terrifying how someone can seem so charismatic and trustworthy and then just
Oh.
turn around and commit these horrific acts.
It's like that saying, the devil's greatest trick was convincing the world he doesn't exist.
Exactly.
But what if charisma itself is actually part of the psychopathic profile?
Whoa, hold on. Are you saying, like, being charming is a red flag?
That's what the video seems to suggest.
But I mean, come on, don't we all try to be at least somewhat charming? Like, that can't be a bad thing.
It's definitely a complicated issue.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it challenges how we think about charisma.
Yeah.
Because is it always genuine, or can it be used to manipulate?
Okay, true.
And the video highlights some of Jim Fallon's own experiences. He talks about how he was incredibly popular growing up. always the life of the party.
Oh, wow.
But he even admits some people picked up on a certain darkness about him.
That actually reminds me of this guy I dated in college. Super charming. Everyone loved him. But looking back,
Yeah.
there were definitely some red flags.
Like what?
I don't know. I even caught him in a few lies about some pretty basic things, but he was so good at talking his way out of it.
That's the scary part, right?
Yeah, I just kind of brushed it off at the time.
It's like trying to spot a counterfeit bill.
Yeah.
It looks real on the surface, but there's
Wow.
just something off.
Yeah. And if we can't always tell the difference, how do we protect ourselves?
That's the million-dollar question.
Like, seriously.
Maybe the key is to be more aware. Pay attention not just to what people say, but how they make us feel.
Oh.
Does their charm feel genuine, or is there a sense of unease underneath?
Okay, so we've got this potential link between charisma and psychopathy.
Right.
But how does that connect back to this missing piece we keep talking about?
Well, what if the missing piece isn't one single thing, but a combination of factors?
Okay.
It could be a specific genetic predisposition, combined with certain environmental triggers,
Yeah.
and then amplified by traits like charisma.
So it's like this recipe for disaster where each ingredient adds another layer of complexity.
Exactly. And that complexity makes it so difficult to predict who will become a psychopath and who won't.
This is really making me think. It's like we keep peeling back the layers of an onion, and with each layer we uncover more questions than answers.
Absolutely.
But there's one thing I keep coming back to, this idea of identifying potential psychopaths early on. Like, what if we could screen every newborn for these brain patterns?
Whoa, now you're getting into some serious ethical territory.
Oh, I know, but what are the implications of that?
It's a question that deserves a lot more discussion.
Okay, so now we're talking about screening newborns. Like, are we going to start labeling babies as potential psychopaths?
I know it sounds pretty sci-fi, right? But the technology is getting there.
But isn't that kind of terrifying? I mean, what about the ethics of all this?
It's a huge ethical dilemma, and there's no easy answer.
Like, on the one hand, I get it, stopping a future Ted Bundy before he hurts anyone.
Right. The idea of preventing violent crime is appealing.
But what if we get it wrong? What if we misinterpret the data and label someone as a psychopath when they're not?
That's the big fear, right?
Yeah,
False positives could ruin someone's life.
totally. And even if the data is accurate, think about the stigma.
Oh, absolutely.
Growing up with that label, potential psychopath.
It would be devastating.
Yeah, people would treat you differently.
Maybe even be afraid of you.
And it could become a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Like you're labeled as a problem, so you become one.
Exactly. And then there's a question of free will.
Yeah.
Are we saying that someone with a certain brain structure is destined to be a criminal?
Right. What about personal responsibility?
It's a slippery slope.
Ugh, this is making my head spin. So we're basically trying to balance the potential to prevent harm with the right to be treated as an individual.
That's a great way to put it.
It's not just about science. It's about our values as a society.
Okay, so where do we go from here? We've uncovered this connection between brain structure, environment, charisma, but it feels like the more we learn, the more complicated it gets.
I think the biggest takeaway is awareness.
Okay.
We need to be aware of the complexity of psychopathy, the interplay of nature and nurture, and the ethical challenges we face.
So it's not just about black and white thinking.
Not at all.
There's a whole lot of gray area.
And we need to be comfortable with that.
And also remember that science is always evolving.
Right.
What we think is true today might change tomorrow.
Exactly. So we need to be open to new information and keep learning.
Well, this deep dive has been a real mind trip. We've gone from brain scans to charm to screening babies. It's been heavy.
It has.
But I think it's important to have these conversations.
I agree.
So for our listeners out there, I want to leave you with this thought.
Yeah.
We've focused a lot on the negative aspects of psychopathy, but what about the potential positives?
Oh, that's interesting.
What if some of those traits, charisma, fearlessness, could actually be beneficial in certain situations? Like, could we harness those aspects for good?
That's a fascinating question.
It is. And it's something I'll definitely be thinking about. That's going to do it for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.
It's been a pleasure.